There we go. Welcome to DEIJB, Diversity, Equity, Inclusivity, Justice, and Belonging from the Esker region. I'm Reverend Jackie Fernandez. And this month we're going to be starting a two-part series on inclusive prayer and meditation. And so this is going to give us opportunity to examine our language that we use in prayer and in meditation. We're going to check it for ableist language. We're going to check it for gender-affirming language. And so really in anticipation of World Day of Prayer, which is next month. So we'll start with the ableist and gender and affirming language, and then next month in September we'll move into more of the universal language, more of the interfaith approach, which I think we're, in general really good at in Unity. So I want to start with the pieces that will take maybe a little more introspection and evaluation. So with that, I will share my screen. All right. So you should see my PowerPoint now. There we go. So we want to expand this, conversation to more than just being interfaith, which is important, and especially with Unity teachings, how we affirm all paths that lead to love and light. So I think, we have it really baked into our culture to be open theologically, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really look at some of the other ways that we can be inclusive. And I'm going to start with this quote, and I'm going to end with a quote today, and to see kind of how it changes its meaning and impact for you, that concepts shape language and language shapes community. And that's from Renee Roederer, Presbyterian minister. And she has a ministry called Parables, and it's worship for all abilities. So again, we'll look at theologically and culturally being inclusive in those ways, and also disability culture with affirming language and gender inclusive language. So, here in Unity, it's easy for us to use different names for God: good, love, light, divine, universe, spirit. We are very open to that. But the question that I will kind of drop here, and then we'll look at it again more next month, but just as we start to sort of unpack our prayer language, is to reflect on the language that you use, and are you in a rut? Like, have you become accustomed to your favorite term for the divine? And how are you connecting to that? Like, how is it reflective of who you are and what you believe today versus maybe when you started using whatever words you use? And if you're praying publicly or with your community, is there sort of just something that you've attached to that maybe could use a little change up every now and then, without judgment? There's no right or wrong way to do this, but it's more, again, about the awareness, which is what we're always wanting to cultivate: our awareness and our mindfulness as we use language and as we approach the topics of DEIJB. I'd like to introduce to you this author and scholar, Amy Kenny. She has a book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request: Disability Justice in the Church. She is not a theologian. She is not a faith leader, but she is a lifelong person of faith. She uses a wheelchair, and she's an author and scholar. And so here she's been featured in Teen Vogue, Sojourners, Shondaland, Reader's Digest, and Huffington Post. And her award-winning book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request, mixes her humor and personal narrative along with her own theology to invite faith communities to rethink their unintentional ableism and learn from the embodied wisdom of disabled people. So she's someone that, is representative of our culture in general, and the kind of thinking that goes into these topics. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a video interview that she gave, and I think this is probably at least a year old at this point, but and I always like to be mindful of that because people do change and evolve over time. But I think this is, representative of what is in her book, and I think is very relevant to our Unity communities. So with that, I'm going to give her the microphone.
Well, I'm a disabled woman, and I grew up in and around churches. And I experienced a lot of ableism in church spaces and from fellow Christians. And a lot of times the ableism would be explicitly conflating disability with sin, or asking me directly what sin is preventing you from getting up and walking,
Oh my God.
or telling me that I don't have enough faith in order to be non-disabled. And that's not really a fun experience. 0 out of 5, would not recommend.
Yeah.
And I also would receive a lot of unsolicited prayers and potions. So people come up to me at church and in other spaces as well and give me curatives that they've made, or suggest oils or eating kale or hitting my leg with a hammer. Somehow I'm still disabled. And also people would attempt to pray for me. And these would be unsolicited prayers that were attempting to get rid of my disabled body. So the book is a response to that, and it's a loving answer to all of those unsolicited prayers and potions, and also invites people to rethink some of those assumptions about disability that are really harmful.
So I want to stop sharing there and just give you all a chance to just respond to her words, if you're willing to.
Well, I'll respond because over the years here in Columbia, Missouri, our University of Missouri has been very supportive of, making everything handicapped accessible, and we're pretty much aware, and we've had quite a few wheelchair users in our church over the years. And so one of them was a woman with CP who joined our prayer chaplain team, or wanted to join when I was the coordinator of it. And sure, she had such a prayer consciousness. And so from her and from knowing people that have different abilities, it's just really been an education. And I just, have really appreciated knowing those people over the years. And one thing I really appreciate is them coming to the place where I have the opportunity to meet them. We're talking, you get in your own circles and you don't really come in contact with people. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my experience.
Beautiful. You're really articulating some important points that, we expand our circles. Sometimes people have to come to us, but being part of a community that supports diversity allows a diversity of people to gather and to come together. And then the other piece that you're talking about is having personal relationship with someone who is different than you in any way, is what can have maybe the most personal impact in opening your eyes and creating more understanding of the issues that people who are different than you face. So thank you for that, Carol. What else?
I really appreciate the overtness of this. Um, it's going to help me think through some things, etc. And one of the things I've been real careful with is we have a prayer care meeting every Wednesday evening. We started at the beginning of the pandemic, and we add people to the prayer list. And I always ask people, would you like to be added? I don't just make this assumption that they
Yeah.
want things thrown at them, even if they're not around physically, because I think that prayer has such power. I
Hmm.
don't want to impose it, or so that's one of the things that came up is I'm glad I do that.
Hmm.
What else am I not doing?
Hmm. That's
And
beautiful consent, right? It's so
yeah,
easy to assume, of course you want prayer. Of course you want me and all my infinite wisdom to pray for you in the ways that I think you need prayer, right? And I'm, being sort of funny about it and caricaturizing it, but it's so easy to fall into the trapping of that mindset. But getting consent, or waiting for someone to invite or ask for prayer, can be so powerful. Yeah.
and
And
when I mentioned that to someone else, they said, well, if they don't want it, they could block it. But why do I want them to waste their energy blocking it?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. It's like visiting someone in the hospital. Sometimes, a congregant will say, well, so and so's in the hospital, are you going to go visit them? It's like, well, they haven't said that that's what they want, you know, and
Right.
maybe I've been in contact, but they, you know, haven't. So it's, you know, it's always important to have consent with people. Yeah, very good. I want
Yeah,
her to.
The
consent
other,
go ahead, Dava. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the other thing that really struck me is the recognition of so often when we're praying for someone, we want their condition to change. Who the hell
Right.
are we to decide that?
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, and I think what I heard from her is that's just part of how she sees herself. It's
Yes.
a wholeness to that
Yes.
perception. And so that's a piece that's really fizzling in me right now is
Yes.
paying attention to
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Very good. Very much what she's thinking and feeling. Yeah. Jeff?
Oh, I think those two themes of consent and assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the it's so easy. And like all things related to, in my experience with DEI work is, um, gosh, we have to be willing to mess up.
Yeah.
You know, like be open and
Yes.
ask for feedback.
Yes.
Um, you know, our music director of 25 years, Mark, is blind. And he's just
Yeah.
he's a regular person in our community, and we've learned so much from him
Mm-hmm.
um, about how normal, you know, how normal that experience is in our community.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes deeper and deeper, including, you know, mental challenges, physical challenges,
Mm-hmm.
hearing loss of our
Mm-hmm.
multi-generational folks.
Right.
Um, so anyway, I really like
Yeah.
her perspective.
Yeah. Very good. You know, there's that sort of quippy saying is, you know, you're either disabled or you will be disabled, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just, you know, if you live long enough that at some point something in the body will break down and, you know, some people might feel like, well,
No.
I'm not going to affirm that, you know, and we're in the physical world and that's the tendency of the body.
Yeah.
And so to be able to be open and vulnerable is what I heard you saying, you know, being willing to ask the questions and make yourself
Yeah.
vulnerable, willing, you know, to maybe say it not quite the right way, but to receive feedback to know how to say it better next time or, you know, how
Yeah.
to understand someone. And that vulnerability is just a huge part of this kind of work.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So let's see. I saw a request to make the PowerPoint bigger. So let's see. Does that help? Is that better? So right here, and Dave, I think you said it. With awareness comes responsibility. So we want to move in the direction of inclusive language, mindful of the impact of our language. And that's not what I was talking to about. Here we go. Some disabled people imagine God to be disabled and do not imagine being healed in heaven. So that's what you were talking about, David, is like she, you know, Amy Kenny, the author, does not see her disability as something terrible that she needs to be healed from. And she is one who talks about, you know, her idea of God is, you know, or herself in heaven is in a gold-plated wheelchair. You know, it's not walking. So we want to avoid perpetuating those negative stigma, the negative stigma of disability. I know deaf people, there's deaf culture, you know, where they celebrate if a baby is born into a deaf family and is born deaf, they celebrate that because it perpetuates the deaf culture, which is something that there's a lot of pride in. And so unless you have a personal relationship with a deaf person, you might not have any idea of that, of how much pride there is in the deaf community. Um, because if you're a hearing person and with age or disease or anything else you lose hearing, it becomes you know, it's a different kind of experience than someone who is born deaf and or into a deaf family. Um, so it's, you know, really just important to keep our minds open and to be open to the possibility, just as David described, that, you know, who are we to know what someone wants, what healing looks like for the person. And I often feel like in ministry, our jobs as ministers is to remind people that healing takes many forms. that even if someone who is asking for a healing to wholeness, what they want is a cure, but healing is a whole different experience than the cure. And that can be a very powerful aspect of the way that we engage in these conversations, and especially as relates to prayer. So we're going to get into removing ableist language, and I want to give really specific ideas. This is not comprehensive. I can't possibly, we don't have enough time today, and I couldn't possibly think of every single example, but I pulled from, I just did a lot of reflection and pulled from what I think are common phrases that we use in prayer and or meditation. And first and foremost, because this is one that I have been able to habituate a change in. So closing your eyes. You know, we often invite people to close their eyes, and especially at the beginning of a meditation. I always add or soften your gaze. And that's because if you're deaf and you're sitting there and you're looking at the interpreter, you can't close your eyes or you lose access to the content of what's happening. So also people with neurodivergent brains, sometimes they close their eyes, or people with different kinds of trauma, it just doesn't work, or physically can't close their eyes. And again, I always like to bring this forward when we talk about these kinds of things, is we can't account for every single person in the room and what their personal experience might be, because a lot of things are unseen. You know, you can't tell by looking at someone necessarily if they are neurodivergent. You can't necessarily tell, you know, what they might be experiencing if they're in extreme pain, or, you know, people can be good at hiding those things. So when we go through this list, I don't want you to get caught up in overwhelm or to feel like you have to, along with every sentence, add something inclusive. It's really about the overall presentation that we give and the overall language and awareness we bring to it. That lets people know that they are safe and seen in the room, even if you don't name their specific condition or experience. They see that you're giving room for people who are not the norm, that you aren't assuming that there is a norm in the room. So something like close your eyes or soften your gaze, right there is permission giving. So if I don't want to close my eyes for whatever reason, maybe there's a video on the screen and I'm really enjoying watching it. Or maybe I just, you know, if I close my eyes, I'm going to fall asleep. You know, there could be a lot of reasons that somebody doesn't want to close their eyes. So as soon as you give permission, then people start to take responsibility for their own prayer and meditation experience, which is ultimately what we want. Another common directive that we might give in meditation is to place your feet flat on the floor. And what we want for that is for people to feel grounding into the earth. But we could instead say, you know, you might say, you know, if it's comfortable for you, place your feet flat on the floor, or imagine yourself rooted into the earth. And that way, if my feet don't touch the floor, if I don't have feet, if it's not comfortable for me, or I don't have feeling in my feet, maybe I have neuropathy, it right there, I can still stay connected and I stay with you in this prayerful process. We might say, listen to the sounds around you. We could say, instead of listen, we could say notice the space around you, because everyone can notice, and whether it's through hearing, whether it's through sight or sensing, feeling, or just noticing the energy. Hear or listen to the voice of God or the voice of the divine. You know, we can say receive divine guidance. Whether you hear or not, you can receive divine guidance. Those with ears to hear is a very popular catchphrase, and it's one I've really tried to just release completely out of my vocabulary, because I have a significant number of deaf folks in my community. And so while the interpreter will often use the translation to not say those with ears to hear, they would say something like those willing to receive. I have just decided for myself that I'm not going to say that phrase, those with ears to hear, because what I mean is those who are willing to receive. And you don't have to have ears or hearing to receive divine guidance. So continue. Stand if you are willing and able, which, you know, when we add willing and able, but it still kind of separates people in the room. So what I say is stand or raise your aura, raise your spirit. And I'm telling you, the smiles across the faces of people when I say that, just because it's fun, it's new, it's fresh, and everyone can raise their aura. And so if they're too tired, it's uncomfortable to stand, but they might have stood up because they don't want to seem unwilling or disabled. They might just sit taller and just smile. And it just is, again, it gives permission for people to really honor their bodies so that the willingness can, there's permission to be unwilling if that's what is really the best choice for you, rather than a judgmental, oh, you're unwilling to stand. You're able, but you're not willing. So we get out of those words, which in and of themselves is not bad. I know they're well intended, but here's an opportunity to just to raise the vibration in the room, which is ultimately what we want when we ask people to stand. It shifts the energy in the room. So turn a blind eye, remove from awareness would be another way to say that. Whole and healthy, we affirm wholeness as an abiding state, and when the opportunity is there to really give the distinction between healing and curing, that the healing can come in many, many ways. Out picture of perfect health. We might pray that for someone who is experiencing an illness or a disease, or whether it's chronic or temporary, an out picturing of perfect health. But we can affirm instead the body temple as divine expression without a judgment of what perfect health might look like, right? Is the body temple is a divine expression in all ways at all times. And we just stay in the flow of what that is, and we can affirm that life is, an divine order is restoring in the cells, or working towards strength and wholeness, without having to get into the nuance of people feeling like they're failed or that their prayers are unanswered if they don't experience a cure. Those with ears to hear. I already did that one. Sorry, that was on there twice. I'll have to take that off. Releasing tension. Well, for some people, it's just enough to notice the tension. Oh, I have tension in my shoulders or in my legs, or, and I don't know how to release it. And now you've moved on in your prayer, and they're still trying to figure out how to release tension, or there's like a resistance to it, or they feel like if I don't release the tension, then this is not going to be a meaningful prayer meditation experience. And now they're in their head, and you've lost that connection. So instead, we can choose to release it or allow it, befriend it, be in harmony with the body, and let it be there with you in this prayerful process or in this meditation. Just notice it. Again, it's a practice of mindfulness. It's a practice of awareness. And rather than sort of inviting this inner violence of tension, go away, tension, go away. Well, I see you, and maybe you're going to stay. Maybe you've been with me for years, and I know you're not leaving right now in this prayer. But there's a process of befriending that tension and not, trying to destroy it, which is really an inner violence. Let's see. Okay, and so then this is kind of specifically for guided meditations. If you give like a physical activity, walking through the forest or along a shore or on a mountainside, just be sure to include alternative ways of moving. So, or just move your body along the shoreline. And then the person can imagine themselves walking or rolling in a chair or floating or flying. It just allows the imagination to flow and to be open without excluding anyone. Just move your body, through a forest. And, sometimes we want to give people a picture of a place. Sometimes we give them space to choose their own space, but then also, why not allow them to just decide how they're moving through that space, whatever it is. And if we include like the senses, which is very common to do when we want to do mindfulness, we might, ask people to notice the scent in the room or the sounds in the room or anything like that. We might just say, to add the word if you notice a scent or an absence of scent. And that can cover a lot of people. Some people have lost their ability to smell. And so if you say, if you notice a scent and I don't have the ability, I might be in my feelings about that, or I might just well, this is a waste of my time right now, and now I'm thinking about something else, or maybe I have grief about that. Or I wonder, what is everyone else smelling? And I'm just out of the prayer. But if you notice a scent, notice it. Or if you notice an absence of scent, and now I'm still in it and I'm noticing that I don't smell anything, but I'm in that mindfulness, which is where we're really trying to get people. What sounds or vibrations do you notice? Sound is a vibration. And there might be a hum of the HVAC unit in the room. There might be a train in the distance, but you can, feel the rumble even if you aren't a hearing person. So they're just really simple ways that expand in the language into being more inclusive. I'm going to stop sharing here and just see if you have any thoughts or questions about any of that.
Boy, I'll say that's excellent. I mean, so many things that I had never really brought to the top of my mind before. So
Yeah,
thank you very
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they're easy, right?
mhm. The guided meditation is very, very helpful there to expand it.
Yeah.
Um, the other thought I have, and it's a little hard to articulate,
Mm-hmm.
is, kind of going back to you've got this disability, so there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in 2001 March, I woke up, sneezed 3 times, and blew out most of my cilia and my hearing. And as a human being, I'm always trying to make meaning of things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of philosophical and divine meaning that I impose on it.
Mm-hmm.
And other people probably do the same thing. And who am I to say you're wrong? You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So that just goes back to respecting who you are as you are.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. You are a divine expression as you are.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
And there may be things about you that you want to change, and and maybe there are things that can be changed or cannot be changed. And so what are we going to do with that? How are we
Mhm.
going to be in harmony with our body temple?
mhm, mhm,
Yeah, right on. I love the suggestions and I've already started incorporating some of them, and I also think it's great in our guided meditations, they are suggestions, they're offerings. And some of the ideas you presented are just sort of like leaving it up to them
Mm-hmm.
in a deeper way, in
Mm-hmm.
ways that we have been specific and directing
Mm-hmm.
from the old school
Right.
of guided
Right.
meditation
Right.
to moving it and letting more space for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I really like it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely, because we're in a time and day where people can get a meditation, a guided meditation
Yeah.
on their smartphone wherever they are. So
Mhm.
people have more access to guided meditations and prayers. And so that raises the general level of creativity, in
It
those
does.
experiences. And so you might even, and again, it's, we can't possibly take the time to name every scenario or
Mhm.
example. But, if, we want to invite people into some kind of moving, like imagining that they're moving through, we could also give permission, or maybe you just want to sit, in a warm, safe cave, and,
Yeah.
give one or two examples, but move on. And it's for the people who maybe they are constantly on the move. They don't want to, it's not going to be a helpful meditation to imagine moving more, like they want to just curl up in a mossy forest floor or climb a tree and, lay
Yeah.
down in a big tree and be held by it, and it's, just a way to, the more permission we give, the more people just feel seen and included. But it also teaches them to honor their experience and their needs and
Yeah.
that is the goal of mindfulness. Because if we can't even identify our needs, then how could we even ask for prayer, in a
Yeah.
meaningful way? We're just kind of
Mhm.
guessing. So we're really training people up at a deeper level to be connected to their spirit, to their bodies, and to their minds, which of course creates a better prayer experience.
Absolutely.
All right, then let's go into gender affirming language. And in Unity, for decades, we've been really good about Mother, Father, God. That's, something that I still hear people talk about in the 70s when I first heard, went to a Unity church and the
I loved it. Yeah.
minister said, Mother, Father, God, and he was a man, and I couldn't believe it, and it was life-changing. You know, and now we have, in the year 2025, we have a whole different conversation about gender.
Yeah.
And in Unity, we have an openness to those conversations. And so here's an invitation to how do we bring that into our language about God? Because that's still the mother, father, God is still anchored in the gender binary. So what do we do for our non-binary folks? How do we help them to feel included? Because we know that God is neither man or woman, and it is
Yeah.
the allness of all. And people, I think, in Unity are generally really good about
Yeah.
not using pronouns for God, like he pronouns, or some will use she to just sort of subvert that. Um, I like to change it up. I very rarely will say he or she. I just say God or universe or spirit. So I try to put myself in a position where I'm not very often using pronouns because I don't like to use it. But they, I will kind of default to they to just normalize that. And I know some people use it, God, the presence, it, and that feels good and natural. And I think there may be times that I do that. But for me, I still want that personal, warm feeling about God. That's just my own personal experience. And I can get there with they. Or again, I just name spirit, divine mind, and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But just to have the awareness because as leaders, we are modeling for people. And and when we can loosen, the language around and really let it be modern and part of the current cultural conversations, then again, that opens the space for more people to feel included. Um, and so when our language for God reflects the gender spectrum, then more people will recognize their own divine nature, and especially for the LGBTQ community that has been so largely shut out. Now, I'm going to play you another video, and this is Pastor Anna Helgen from Edina Community Lutheran Church. And this is so fun. She calls it the Sparkle Creed. And this is really like going all the way in terms of loosening up how we understand gender and the divine. So take a listen here.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let us confess our faith today in the words of the Sparkle Creed. I believe in the non-binary God, whose pronouns are plural. I believe in Jesus Christ, their child, who wore a fabulous tunic and had 2 dads, and saw everyone as a sibling child of God. I believe in the rainbow spirit, who shatters our image of one white light and refracts it into a rainbow of gorgeous diversity. I believe in the Church of Everyday Saints, as numerous, creative, and resilient as patches on the AIDS quilt, whose feet are grounded in mud and whose eyes gaze at the stars in wonder. I believe in the calling to each of us that love is love is love. So, beloved, let us love. I believe, glorious God, help my unbelief. Amen.
How fun is that? So here's just a few examples for gender affirming language and prayer and meditation. We often will say as men and women, or, ladies and gentlemen, or welcome, brothers and sisters, so again, that's the binary, and anyone.
Disease or ulcerative colitis can make it hard to be there when it matters most.
What
If
is
your
that?
symptoms aren't under control,
Does that sound from Mike? Okay. Um, sorry. That's still in the gender binary.
That
So
was totally me. I'm sorry. I was grabbing the Sparkle Creed to save it for the
oh,
future. And
good,
yeah,
good. I'm
okay, we're
glad.
good.
Okay. And this PowerPoint will be on the Esker website too. So, and it's in the PowerPoint. So as people, as individuals and expressions of God, so we don't have to make gender So to avoid the trapping of being in the binary, we just don't even have to mention who are men or women. It's really most often not relevant to what we actually want to say. It's just habitual. It's just a habit because typically it was men in the room. Then women came into the room, so it just sort of became, a habit to say as ladies and gentlemen or as men and women, so that we're naming the people in the room. But now we know that gender is more than just the binary. So easy ways to just loosen that up as expressions of God, as individuals, as people, divine feminine and the divine masculine. We can just talk about the qualities, the divine nature of nurturing, of soft strength or bold strength or wisdom or creativity. We don't have to pair those with the feminine or the masculine. We have done that historically, and we don't have to keep doing that. There may be times where it's valid or it's part of a point that you're wanting to make, or it's demonstrated in a character from the Bible, and so it's a woman, and so you want to talk about her nurturing or her bold strength or soft strength, or that's okay. I'm not saying to not ever do that again. I'm just saying there are ways that we can just talk about the qualities as divine nature without having to pair it to a masculinity or to femininity. So, and instead of saying, we could add this phrase. So instead of just hooking onto male or female to that binary, or wherever you find yourself on or off the gender spectrum. We've talked about people who identify as agender. They're not non-binary. They're not even on the gender spectrum. They just see themselves as being completely apart from any gender expression. So sometimes I will say that wherever you find yourself on or off the gender spectrum, to be most inclusive. Sometimes that requires a little bit of education, so it may or may not be appropriate because it might be more disruptive in the flow of what you're doing. But for you to have the awareness and to have that sort of in your own sense of competency with language and how we are communicating what we actually want to say can be really important. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there are any thoughts about the video or just about gender affirming language.
Well, we've had some good sessions from our LGBTQ community itself and members who attended about this. One was even a trainer who did training for the state and various things. But the thing that he had said was just ask. Don't be afraid to ask what they want.
Yeah.
And so there was one woman. She said well, anyway, she was in the women's bathroom, and I said, what pronouns do you use? And she says, oh, she. I'm a woman, and so it was kind of uncomfortable for me at first, but I think it was a good experience, and I'm more willing to ask.
Mm-hmm. Good, good. It can be really helpful too if you start when you introduce yourself. I'm Carol, my pronouns are she, her. And right there, it gives permission for the other person, and it normalizes that. And so instead of only the people who seem questionable have to
Right.
say, it's like we're all going to just give our pronouns, and some people might change their pronouns. And so again, it normalizes that part of the conversation.
Yeah, good point.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for being brave and asking the question. Yeah. What else?
I hate to take up too much time, but I just had this recognition of my imposition of something on my community, and so I want to ask them, what do you guys want? Because I don't like pronouns for God, and I usually just say beloved presence.
Mm-hmm.
Am I imposing that on my community now? Are any of them longing for a gender?
Ah, yeah.
So I will ask that on Sunday.
Oh, what a great question. Because it sparks thought and thoughtfulness,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows people space to examine not just their beliefs, but their desire. Because I can know that God is present everywhere, that God is not a person in the sky or anywhere, and I can still desire a closeness with a being. And And God can be both, right? God in me and all around me can also take form, of a being that I can feel close to, that I can feel held by, that I can feel the loving arms. And I think it's okay to give permission for that. And so for someone, they might want their God to be an expression of the feminine, or someone else might want their God to be an expression of the masculine. As long as we're talking about it and not declaring that any one thing is true, capital T truth, it's your truth, and God is always, by our own design, right? Because we can only really truly comprehend and understand, we are limited as soon as
Yeah.
we've named it. And so as long as we are operating from that understanding, I think that's a beautiful question to ask, just to give people the awareness that even Deva's idea of the beloved presence isn't the only idea or truth or
Yeah.
experience. And I think that's such beautiful modeling. Yeah.
I love all these suggestions and thoughts for awareness. And I retired Mother, Father, God, a few years ago. And then it came out of my mouth, like in the midst of a guided meditation the other day. I was like, what? Like old habits die hard. But I'll
Yes.
sometimes speak to like God or spirit as like the ultimate non-binary and speak to that like
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
pulpit.
Yeah.
And I am comfortable with it, but
hmm
I'll sometimes I'll introduce that during a talk
Yeah.
to, to offer our listeners, a
hmm
different perspective.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
beautiful. And I think that's the greatest gift that we give people in unity is that we give permission for people to have their
Yeah,
perspective and for it to be valid,
yeah.
We're all just trying to figure it out. So,
I had also an interesting, really, argument with my music director when I talked about some of the songs that they choose, are a little external gaudy and have some hymn in there.
mhm,
And they took a really strong stance to say, and there is room for tradition and comfort in
yeah,
some of these songs.
yeah,
Um, and that we came to a happy medium.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and
Good,
and
good.
I
I think
do,
that's so important.
and I do respect that and get it. It's just, for other people, for some it's comfortable, for some it's a trigger.
Right.
And that's
Yes.
just the way it is.
It's
Mhm.
just the way it is, and it's so important to have that awareness and to be able
Yeah.
to hold space for both perspectives and everything in between.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Just have one more slide, and it's closing with that same quote. And so I'm just wondering if it hits you differently. Concepts shape language, and language shapes community. We teach by example as models of inclusive language. So I always give the directive, think about it, talk about it, demonstrate it. That's what we're here to do.
Right.
Yeah. And so in 2 weeks, on the fourth Thursday, which is August 28th, we'll have our reflection session. And here's the homework, should you choose to accept it, is to watch or listen to a few recordings of your prayers and meditations.
Yeah.
And notice opportunities to shape your language in a way that reflects you and your community. Try it out. If you find yourself in a rut and you're like, oh, I just keep using the word God over and over, and I thought I was changing it up, or I keep saying universe and I thought I was changing it up. And this is, again, it's not to judge or to make any kind of failing out of your own habits. They are totally valid, but to discover room, to expand the way you provide inclusive space for people. So I would love for you to do that. I'm going to do it. I also hate listening to my own recording. So, we're going to be in that together if that's how you feel. But also let it be a blessing to you. Let
Yeah.
your own prayer and your own words be a blessing to you. And then also take some time to reflect on how you might expand your own language and fold some of these ideas in that we've talked about. So I look forward. I hope you all come back in 2 weeks and we'll talk more about it. All right.
Yes. Jackie,
Awesome.
Carol, Deva, thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody. It was really
Thank
great.
you.
Enlightening.
Thank you so much.